Alright guys, quick disclaimer. The airsoft replica and or parts in this video are not real firearms. And nothing shown works in real firearms either. So don't try it. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. And everything here is strictly for airsoft use. Again, these are airsoft use only. Alright, let's get into it. Alright guys, welcome to another Wyshtech build video. This is a brand new Cyma M14 replica. And what I plan on doing here is building this M14 into one heck of a DMR by increasing its joules to 2.0 on 4 gram BBs. That's going to make this thing shoot insanely far. And in this video, you're going to see how that's going to be achievable. And I'm also going to do some custom mods to the gearbox shell itself to really make this thing shoot smooth. First thing I'm going to show you guys is what's going to go into this build to make that possible. And install the parts, chrono it, and then finally do a field test to see how the accuracy is with 4 gram BBs at 2 joules. And you're not going to want to miss the parts presentation of this video because there's something very unique that's going in this build that you guys might be interested in. So let's get to what's going in this build. Alright guys, easy parts laid out. So starting from left to right, we got the Wyshtech JVAN M14 Gearset. You can find all these parts down in the description below. I'll leave links for you. Really excited to see how these turn out on this build. For the piston, we're going with the retro arm 16 tooth, and we're going to try and use the full stroke of the 16 tooth in this build. I'm going to try to keep the RPM as low as possible so we don't run into premature engagement issues with this, which I highly doubt considering the combination of ratio motor and the battery that we're intending to use with this build. And then we got a retro arms SR25 cylinder that I trimmed down just a little bit to fit the stock gearbox perfectly, even better than factory, because with these M14 version 7 gearbox shells, they're typically a little bit longer than a regular cylinder. That's why I use an SR25 cylinder, because they're slightly longer, and I just trimmed it down using my end mill, and I was able to get it to precisely fit. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then we are using an ASG cylinder head, and I'll tell you why. Because it has that little drop off right here perfectly for a silenced piston head, so that when the piston comes forward and meets with the cylinder head, it's nice and flat, just like that. And that brings me to my next point, the piston head. This is a retro arm silent piston head. I decided to go with this, not only because it has a rubber front on here to help deaden the sound of which the piston slaps against the cylinder head, making it sound quieter when it shoots, but also this opening here fits an EPS weight kit that you can find on my website. Drops perfectly down in there. However, there's a little bit of a gap down there, so I had to use some shims so that when you attach it to the piston, the weights don't shake around back and forth as this shoots. We don't want that. So with these shims and the weight, and then part of the weight kit, these two, and then this guy I found in my parts tray, along with the piston, gives our total weight to about 37 grams. Why so much weight? Well, if we're going to be shooting 4.0s at around 2 joules, the added weight is going to help shooting a heavyweight BB like a 4.0. This is only needed if you're making a DMR platform that shoots 4.0s and above. Otherwise, anything lighter than that, you won't see any difference whatsoever. Through my own testing, I found that I had as high as 0.3 joules added to the build simply by adding more weight. And that's mainly because when you're trying to shoot a heavyweight 4 gram BBs down the barrel, there's a little bit of an air braking effect. And when you add weight, thanks to physics, it creates a momentum, so it's less likely to slow down your piston, because air braking effect of the heavy ass weight BB going down the barrel does indeed slow down the piston a little bit. And when you add a little bit of weight to it, it counters that a little bit. In return, you don't have to use as heavy as a spring, and therefore not as much stress on the gearbox shell and internals to achieve whatever joules you're looking for. But anyways, that's a lot to talk about, and I think I covered that in my compression video. For nozzle, we are going with the SHS nozzle, and I actually had to trim the top of it off camera because it was rubbing on the top of the gearbox shell. And once I made these modifications, and then of course I also had to modify the OEM tappet plate right here, because when you put the tappet plate on there, it pushes the tappet plate down at the bottom of the gearbox shell and it rubs right there. So I took off maybe about 0.3 millimeters of plastic to soften it up a bit. so that the nozzle articulates back and forth a lot easier. Which brings me to my next point. We are going to be reusing the factory tappet plate because it is rigid as hell and it fits really good in the OEM gearbox, so I don't see the reason to change it out. And of course, we're reusing the OEM tappet spring, so there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think it's going to make any difference. And same with the anti-reversal latch. And as you can already see, we're going to go with the Solink LITE 35K short motor. We're going to keep the pinion gear on this motor because I know for a fact that the Solink pinion gears mesh really well to JVAN bevel gears. So I don't think we need to replace that. And then because the OEM did not have one, we're putting a version 3 spring guide as all metal with a thrust bearing. The OEM one did not have one and it was just plastic. So I did not want to risk that breaking in the build like this. As far as the hop-up goes, we have to use the OEM one because there's unfortunately no aftermarket. I wish there was, but it'll have to do. And luckily it does have TDC, as you can see right here. So when this pushes up, that nub is going straight down instead of in an arc like on traditional hop-ups. Hopefully we don't have any issues with the hop-up in terms of feeding and accuracy results. Moving on, I'm going to try the M140 spring first to hit our 2.0 joules. If these weights end up getting us over 2.0 joules, then I'm either going to remove a few weights or drop down to a M130 spring. Going back on the hop-up, we're going to use the Friction Pro bucking with Maple Leaf's hop-up tensioner. I'm not going to use the factory one out of this because it's going to be too soft for the 4.0s in my opinion, and the Maple Leaf nub is going to fit better and more tight so it doesn't move around when the replica is cycling. Customer just wants a Lambda one. He doesn't want anything super fancy, so we're just going to go with the Lambda 1 363, and with the air voluming on this should get us right where we need to be to get the most consistent FPS possible with 4.0s. And then I'm going to hate myself for doing this because it's going to take a lot of work, but I am going to enlarge these holes from 7mm to 8mm holes so we can fit EZO bearing J-cage bearings in these. That way we can reduce the friction, making this build more efficient, and these bearings will make the JVAN gears mesh and run a lot smoother, so it should make this setup pretty damn smooth when it's all done. And in the run this whole setup, I'm very excited to put in the all new PERUN M14 ETU. I did a video on covering this guy, and I'll leave the card for it for you to check out if you want up here in the corner. I go in detail on how this works and how it gets installed, but needless to say, I'm excited to have this in this build, and so is the customer, because this is going to allow us to get accurate precocking as well as have a built-in clicker like the PERUN version 2 Pro clicker, where it clicks on every time you pull the trigger to give it a more realistic trigger pull. So with all that being said, I'm about to go work my ass off and get all these parts installed, and hopefully things go smoothly. If anything changes, I'll share that with you guys before we head to the chrono. Okay, let's do this.
One eternity later.
Okay, so got the first step done. 8mm bearings installed. That was a process. I even polished the inside of the gearbox shell to get rid of any burrs from doing all this and what have you. I did test fit the gears real quick to make sure that they weren't binding, because there was a chance that I could have got these bearings to sit at an angle because of how I milled these. But here's a picture of my end mill and what it kind of looks like on one of the bearing holes that I modified. Here's a before and now after. So I'm gonna now get the gears shimmed up and the rest of the parts fitted in here to make sure everything fits and going to run together real smooth, and I'll be right back with you guys.
5 minutes later.
Okay, got to the point where I'm about to close up the gearbox. Got my M140 spring ready to go and everything's all shimmed up. I checked the shimming prior to closing up the gearbox, and I think we're good to go. Put this bad boy back together and see how it sounds.
Alrighty then.
Okay, got it together. I have the PERUN ETU installed. I didn't put everything back on because I'll explain here in a little bit, but we want to make sure this thing is running smoothly. So let's go ahead and plug in the battery. Alright, got the green light, so it's all ready to go. So I did set this up so that when the levers push forward, it's in semi. And I already, off camera, programmed precocking. So listen to this. You can't even hear the gears. I'll spam it now. Now let's shoot it full auto. This is on a 7.4 LiPo, by the way. Normally you definitely hear a gear whine with the 7.4 because the gears run much slower. So the gear whine's more audible, but not in this case. I did something right. Yeah, I am just blown away with how smooth this is already coming out. Once it's all together, I know for a fact this thing is be damn quiet. But anyways, off camera, I did find that the nozzle was binding up, and it was because this tappet plate was getting pushed down by the nozzle still a little bit too much, and I had to throw up my end mill and trim the base of it thinner because the tappet plate was actually rubbing on the bottom here real hard, and it wasn't allowing the nozzle to articulate back and forth. And the downside to that doing that is now we got a slightly wobbly nozzle, but I'm not too worried about that because I still think it's gonna shoot just fine. My only concern is mid-cap syndrome, but I've never seen that happen on an M14 replica. But anyways, the reason why I didn't put the rest of the stuff on yet is because I need to find out if the M140 spring that's in this thing is going to get it over 2 joules or not. And I think I'm going to make sure it doesn't go any higher than 2.2 because once you adjust the hop up, it'll bring that joules right back down. And I'm hoping for, once the hop up is adjusted to hop the 40 gram BBs, that it won't go over 2 joules, if that makes any sense. So that being said, I got to figure out how I'm going to put this partially together with the receiver and shoot it in a chrono because I don't want to have to tear this whole thing apart a million times, because the more you install parts and take it back apart, the more wear and tear the parts will have with each other, with like the screws stripping and parts breaking. So I want to try and avoid that. I still got to put the hop up and bucking together with the new Lambda barrel, going much shorter because of air volume ratio. Look at how long this thing is. This is way too long for 40 gram BBs. We'll lose a lot of joules if we don't go to a shorter barrel because of air volume ratio. Anyways, with that being said, I'm going to jump on that setup and get back to you.
2 hours later.
Yeah, I got a little carried away. Went ahead and put it all together and I chronoed it off camera. Sorry about that, guys, but I'm still going to chrono it. I just wanted to make damn sure I wasn't going to have to take it all apart, and I just found it easier just to go ahead and chrono it off camera and just get everything all good to go. But anyway, seems like the clicker is a bit lighter now that everything's in there. I'm not sure, but I have to look a little deeper, but it might be binding up a little bit. I'm not sure, but I mean, it still clicks. Just to show you, I shrink wrap all the wiring all the way back, and then in this photo, you see that I shortened up the wiring and I soldered the positive and negative straight to the motor to make this thing as reliable as possible. And I already got a 7.4 GMB LiPo battery in here. I'm gonna go plug it up, and then I gotta put some 4 gram BBs in this magazine and chrono it, and you guys can see how this thing sounds. Okay, right here is going to be our joules displayed. I have it set to 4.0s. Our FPS is going to be right here, and if you see numbers right here, that's our rounds per second. We're going to do 10 shots in semi so we can get an average. Damn, this thing runs so smooth. I'm so happy about it. But look at that. We're just under 2 joules, so we're looking good. And you can see right here the FPS consistency. All right, so let's go ahead and spam semi and see how she sounds. It's interesting that the FPS goes up a little bit when I spam semi. It's almost like the bucking lips or something is warming up or something. Not entirely sure, but the FPS increase is very negligible. The thing is that we're very consistent. So with that being said, let's go see how accurate this thing is out in the range testing. I'm going to shoot at my tree that I typically do. It's 156 feet away. And I got a rail system put on this that you guys probably saw earlier to put my run cam on, so I can really get good footage to show you guys how this thing is shooting. So I went to go range test it off camera just to make sure everything was kosher, and then I was going to record it. Well, ran into a new problem. It was misfeeding, and I think the reason why is because the spring in this magazine is just too weak when it's low on the amount of rounds that are left. Because I think when there's about 10 or so rounds left, the spring is just not strong enough because there's no issue with feeding until it's almost out of BBs. And so to help with that spring issue, I think we can get away with running a delayer chip. So this one in particular is shaped differently, and some people might say,
"Oh, Wyshtech, that's put on the wrong way."
There's a reason to every method I do in my builds. So in this case, if you watch, take this piston out so it's not a distraction. So I got my tappet plate all the way forward, and if I rotate it, you can see like how beautifully matched that curvature is. So I'm getting maximum contact on that delayer chip before the tappet plate gets pulled back. So this is going to reduce wear and tear. Additionally, when it's starting to pull it back, you'll see that it's pivoting on that edge there. And then once it's pulled all the way back, and it goes past that point of which the tappet plate will start moving back, got this nice little curve here to help guide that tappet plate instead of snapping it forward. I also trimmed the tappet plate a little bit more, and we still have all this rotation right here before the tappet plate gets pulled back. This will allow the piston plenty of time to get pulled back and released. So let's demonstrate that. I got my piston in, tappet plate's all the way forward, tappet plate's getting pulled back, so is the piston. And what matters most is making sure that this tappet plate doesn't get pulled back before that piston finishes its stroke. So as we go, the tappet plate's getting released. Now it's completely released at this point right here. And I trimmed it in such a way, the tappet plate fin, that when it's pre-cocked, the nozzle is in the closed bolt position, even with this amount of teeth remaining before the piston release. And that's to stabilize FPS as much as possible and keep that nozzle nice and flat against that booking. And so if we go on the last tooth where it releases the piston, we have a lot of rotation. That distance from here to here is the amount of time that is allowed for the piston to finish its stroke before the tappet plate gets pulled back. And if you want more elaborate description or understanding on how tappet plate timing works, I'll leave a card right up here in the corner of the screen, and you can check that out and get a better understanding of tappet plate timing. But anyways, so this delayer chip is in a good position for both wear and tear and tappet plate timing. So it's not in the wrong spot or anything. It's really to my preference as a tech. Now you can do it whichever way works best for you, but this method, the way I look at it, that gives me that consistent FPS and helps seat that BB in the chamber as stable as possible. So anyways, I'm going to throw this back together. I'm going to rechrome it, and then we'll hopefully go out to the field and see how this turned out in terms of accuracy, and hopefully that misfeed goes away so that every round feeds from that mid cap. If we have issues again, we'll address them accordingly. Alright, so we're shooting 4 gram BBs, and that tree's about 153 feet away. So here we go. Alright, let's spam semi. And we're out. Damn, this thing is ridiculously accurate. Man, that was great. So this thing shot amazing. I was pretty impressed. Full auto is still intact if the user wants to keep that feature in this replica. But overall, I have to say this entire build was a blast. If you really like how I built this M14 and would like me to build you one, I'll leave a link down in the description below where you can fill out a build form request, and I can build you too a really nice M14. I'm very jealous of this build because this isn't mine. This is now going back to the customer, brand new, and this thing shoots amazing. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe so you can help this channel grow more and do more videos like this. And with all that out of the way, I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe. Take it easy, guys.